All right. So, let's see here. In your eyes, what is a flaw in our current criminal justice system in the United States?
One. Just one?
Just let's go with two. Let's limit it to two.
Okay. So I'm not a big fan of pretrial incarceration.
Okay.
We have a big problem with people sitting in jail for a year, year and a half, 2 years. I had one client that I had sat in jail for 4 years, waiting for trial, and then was found not guilty. So all that time that you're sitting in jail, not able to make bail, why? What was the use of that? And they don't get compensated for that time. So
Because they weren't actually convicted.
right. So it right. So it just feels like a debtor's prison. If you can afford, if you have the right societal status, if you can afford bail, then you can get out, you can live life, you can work, you can probably hire your own defense attorney, maybe shop for a higher caliber defense attorney. But if you can't, then you're stuck.
Yeah.
So not a huge fan of that. Another one is pretty technical, but on appeal in Texas, the courts do not consider the facts at trial. In other words, they consider procedural matters. They don't consider whether or not there was sufficient evidence for the person to be found guilty. They don't relitigate any of the issues that came up during the trial. So if you have someone that is actually innocent, like the client that I mentioned earlier, the presumption of innocence doesn't apply once you leave the courtroom and you're found guilty. On appeal, there is a presumption that the jury or the judge did everything that they were supposed to, that the person is in fact guilty, and you've got to find a good reason to overturn the case that has to deal with procedural matters. And that's because we've eliminated something called factual review here in Texas. That's probably only about 5 or 6 years old now.
Why was it eliminated? Because that seems kind of silly.
Efficiency. It gives the courts of appeals one less thing to look at, one less thing to do. So it's frustrating, and
that sounds positively idiotic.
Right. And welcome to the practice of criminal law.
Wow. Okay. All right. Wow. Okay, so let's go with a follow-up question on the bail and the pretrial incarceration. Do you think we should do away with the bail bondsman thing like they're trying to do, or like they attempted to do in New York City?
I'm interested in that. I'm cautiously optimistic. I want to follow that for a while and see how that all plays out. But I mean, something like that would probably be preferable, and I think that New York is sort of the crash test dummy for that whole idea right now. I think that for some crimes, you're going to need some sort of assurance that these clients that are sitting in jail on huge charges like murder, capital murder, aren't going to be a flight risk. And so a lot of people seem to think that that's tied to your financial ability, but I'm not sure what else to do. I mean, you can cut an ankle monitor. You can cut an ankle monitor if you really want to.
Yeah.
So in those cases, I think that bail may be appropriate, but I'm not completely sure how to go about it.
Well, and with New York City basically doing away with low-level arrest or low-level prosecution and stuff, it seems like New York City might not be the best place to test this right now with everything else going on
right
in the midst of it, because you're not going to get a really clear, accurate picture is this working or is it not, because we're ignoring a whole bunch of other stuff right now for the sake of whatever political machinations there are.
Sure. Yeah.
So, Yeah, I've got mixed feelings on it. I'm still like, because we went through that entire process. I don't remember if you remember a couple years ago, one of the rent-to-own furniture companies
Yeah.
was basically having people thrown in debtor's prison, essentially. And last time I checked, isn't debtor's prison pretty much specifically prohibited by U.S. constitutional law?
Exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Let's go with something a little easier now. Yeah, it just goes from like really deep to like, yeah.
Yeah, once the ball gets rolling, I mean, it's hard to stop it.
Yeah. Okay. So this is from a specific student. I am wanting to become a lawyer, but can't decide between these two fields: domestic abuse and restorative justice. What do you recommend? Is there really even a legal difference when you're in law school for this?
So in terms of law school, because I think that's the easier part of the question, I don't think that there's any school or course. Well, let me walk that back. I don't think that there's any school that is going to, in particular, help prepare you to dive into either one of those fields more than the other.
Okay.
Now, when you say domestic abuse or restorative justice are your practice areas of interest, domestic abuse could mean the prosecution of domestic abuse cases. It could mean the defense of domestic abuse cases, or it could even mean suing individuals who commit domestic abuse. Those are all existing practice areas. So I'm not completely sure which one this particular student is interested in. I'm going to assume that they're talking about the prosecution of or defense of domestic cases. So looking at that balanced against the question of restorative justice, restorative justice is its own animal, and it's a really unique and new field. And I say new field, I don't even think it's necessarily a field yet. I think it's an idea that we're kicking around and checking the tires on. If you've read the book, now of course I can't think of it. It was Just a Movie, and it's based on a true story. This is the same the guy that wrote it is the same individual that created the lynching memorial.
I'm looking it up right now. See if I can find it real quick.
If you hadn't asked me, let's see if I can find it, because Brian Stevenson. I'm pretty sure it's Brian Stevenson. Let's see. Yes, it's Brian Stevenson. And the book that he wrote was Just Mercy. Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. So if you're familiar with the work of Brian Stevenson, who wrote Just Mercy, and all the work that he's been doing about looking into how to incorporate restorative justice into American criminal justice, you would see, I mean, it is a radically different idea in terms of how you approach the justice system, the criminal system is more accurate. So, for example, if one of Stevenson's questions that he asks is, if I steal from someone, do I commit a crime against society at large or against that individual person? And so therefore, shouldn't the punishment, if it's just the latter, shouldn't the punishment be catered to restoring the relationship and to rehabilitation and reparations related to that relationship, that specific individual that victim had with the accused, the offender.
Yeah.
Such a new and radical concept that I don't think anyone is on the frontiers of
Yeah.
that. And I don't think that it would necessarily hurt you or behoove you to go into any particular school in order to research and to develop a better understanding of that concept. What may help you is working somewhere, going to school somewhere near the foundation that Bryan Stevenson has, so that you can try to have an internship and work with him and get a feel for how that all works and how to incorporate that into different fields once you do graduate.
Okay. Great answer. Thank you, Robert. Okay, easy question. What is a competitive GPA to get into Baylor Law?
I am not sure what the current numbers on that are. So when you apply to a law school, you'll find that there's usually a grid that the schools use to sort of go through their candidates. And on one side of the grid is your GPA. On the other side of the grid is your test score on your LSAT. And those two things sort of meet in different places. And then schools have different hot zones or cold zones of acceptance based on that grid. And then your extracurricular activities, your resume, your things like that can sort of factor into also where you go on that grid. And I'm not sure what sort of GPA Baylor Law School is looking at right now.
Yeah.
If you look at, I think it's U.S. News and World Report publishes a book every year that you can probably find in the library. And it has to do with those acceptance rates. You can just go through there and find that information. It's probably on the websites of different law schools as well.
Yep. All right. Okay. Let's see. All right. So do you have a quote that you refer to often in your legal practice? To kind of give an example is a quote I refer to quite often. It's on the wall of my room in my classroom is from Adam Savage. And it says, the only difference between science and fooling around is writing it down. Do you have a quote, a kind of a go-to quote for you in the legal field or for you personally?
Yeah, there's a few. The one that comes to mind immediately is actually right next to us. I'm going to see if I can turn the computer, and I'm not sure whether or not.
I don't know why I'm turning my head to. I'm like turning my head too. I'm like, that's not helping.
I'm not sure whether it's on Mirror or not, so I'm just going to go ahead and read this out loud. It is from Theodore Roosevelt, and it's The Man in the Arena. And it says, it is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how strong the man stumbles, or where the doer of the deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly yet errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat.
Nice.
So that's all a long-winded way of saying, if you're not getting in the ring with me, you really can't tell me anything about how I should do my job. But more than that, just that, there's lots of, Brene Brown has a really great quote, and it's something very similar. It says there's lots of cheap seats in the arenas that are filled with people that are essentially Sunday quarterbacking, and they have a lot to say about how things are done, but none of them will actually get in the ring and fight the fight. So it's when you're doing the work, when you're fighting the good fight, when you have everything on the line, and you can you know defeat because you have everything on the line. You know the thrill of victory because you had everything on the line and you won. That's the person that should. That's the person that understands the work that they do, not the people in the cheap seats.
Yeah, got to have some skin in the game, so to speak.
Got to have skin in the game.
Yep. That's a great quote. Would you, when you email me later, would you email me that quote also, or the long version?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Okay, so let's go back to some really basic legal questions. This one might be really broad. What are police powers and what are your rights?
That's a great question. It is the subject of entire courses that are semester-long courses at any given law school. The police have a broad range of powers and limitations that are based on your constitutional rights.
Okay.
And the ones that we most frequently encounter are related to search and seizure. Can an officer pull you over? Can an officer search your vehicle? Can an officer search your person? And it really is a matter of knowing so much case law and so many different statutes to understand what limitations the police have and how you go about bringing those limitations up correctly in the right place at the right time, not on the roadside.
Yeah. Well, I guess this goes along with this, the follow-up question. What are your rights after an arrest?
Right. So the Miranda warnings that you hear given on TV sometimes, or that you'll hear an officer sometimes give when they're making an arrest, those are designed to quickly distill for you what your most important and basic rights are. You do have the right to remain silent because you need to know that if you sneeze, if you say, I didn't do anything, the inflection that you use, how you looked when you said it, all of that can be used against you later in the court of law. I've had cases where prosecutors tried to make hay out of the fact that the client said, I didn't do anything. Well, that's the lack of information. That's not affirmative information, but that the fact that they said that was still itself used against them. So when they say you have the right to remain silent, that is your Fifth Amendment right to remain silent against self-incrimination. You should use that. You actually have a Fifth Amendment and a Sixth Amendment right to an attorney. You have a right to have an attorney help you get your bail established, to represent you in your case. You should use those rights. You have the right to be free from cruel and unusual punishment, which has to do with what the prosecutors can and can't get away with, or what the judge can and can't get away with. There's just a whole host of rights that come into play once you're arrested. And to really understand all of them, there's no short, easy answer. You really should consult with a lawyer if you find yourself in that situation.
So utilize your Fifth Amendment right and stop talking, and utilize your Sixth Amendment right and keep asking for a lawyer.
Yep.
Got it. Okay. All right. Do you think violence and or crime has been increasing or decreasing in Waco in the last few years?
There's an ebb and a flow to it. It's actually a pretty good question. I remember in 2014 or so, there was a story in the Waco Trib that indicated that violent crime was reducing, but pretty soon after that, we had an uptick in murder cases. And this case, in murder cases.
In murder cases, okay.
And so in this year, 2020, we've already, I think, exceeded the last couple of years in murder cases. So it's really there's really an ebb and a flow to it. There's nothing that necessarily relates to the crimes that are violent in nature, like murder, domestic assault. Those things don't necessarily relate to any other trends like how the economy is doing or anything like that. Those are usually crimes that are more crimes of passion. Now,
Yeah.
your violent thefts, so like your burglaries, your aggravated robberies, your robberies, things like that, those things can be tied directly to financial circumstances.
Okay.
But it generally is. I think it's on balance. It's probably about the same over the last few years, but it's currently on an uptick.
So what you're saying is we can't blame the Magnolia Silos downtown for the uptick in the murder rate?
Right.
Got it. Chip and Joe's off the hook. Got it. Um,
Now, it might have a correlation to road rage,
but that is not causation.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we actually did a little miniature online research project of the correlation and causation between what the cartels and the mafia is doing right now. Their responses to the coronavirus are basically either they're taking advantage of as a public relations thing, coming in and fixing problems where the government is like falling down. Particularly in Mexico, they're actually handing out cartel branded emergency relief kits with like face mask and food and money in them. And the president of Mexico actually came on the news. I guess it was about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, basically telling the cartels to stop doing that because I'm sure that's going to work really well. And then over in Italy and Sicily, the mafia has been running a knockoff N95 face mask scheme and counterfeit hand sanitizer. So the question is, basically, it's a thought process question for my students. Okay, is the mafia's or is the cartel's power? Is it being caused by the virus, or is it just correlation based on these other factors that are coming into play?
Wow, that's interesting.
And that's really an aspect of criminal intelligence more than anything.
Wow, that's stuff I never would have thought of.
So it helps that I follow a bunch of people that are way smarter than I am and just pick and listen to what they say and try to be quiet most times.
Like
okay. Do what? Yeah, like right now. Okay, so let's go. If you weren't a lawyer, what other job would you have, Mr. Callahan?
I'm such a nerd that science fiction, Star Trek, Star Wars, all that stuff has always interested me. So, I don't know that I would have thought about it in advance, but I think that I would have loved to have tried to have been an astronaut.
Okay. Very cool. Personally, I just want to be I have a minor in theatrical special effects. And if I could have afforded the ability to do an unpaid internship, I would have done probably a science fiction special effects movie internship in college, but I just couldn't afford to. Basically, they don't pay because everybody wants to do it. Right. They don't pay anybody. And I'm like, there's no way I'm coming up with $20,000 to go live in California for that much time for an internship. So, right. No. All right. So back to legal questions. When you lose a case, how does that play out for your client?
Yeah, great question. So when a case is done, we lost the case. I have a conversation with my client about the right that they have to an appeal. I think you have 14 days after the judgment is rendered to decide whether or not you want to try to appeal your case. I usually will go ahead and file a notice of appeal and let the Court of Appeal know that my client is interested in appealing his case anyway. And then if they change their mind, they can always go back and remove their request for an appeal. But you have certain deadlines. You have to make sure that you don't miss those. So then I sort of marshal all the evidence together that came up in the trial and create some notes about what happened in the trial, and I try to pass that information on to the attorney that's going to handle the appeal. Sometimes we're appointed or hired to handle the appeal of the same case. And so in that case, then we do a lot of things to get the transcript from the court reporter and just review all the information. We do a lot of legal research to see whether or not the judge, jury, or prosecutor did something that they weren't supposed to do, or maybe a witness like a police officer did something they weren't supposed to do, and to see whether or not that gives us a ground of appeal. We type up and submit a brief to the appellate court. That's usually something like 20 pages, and it usually takes like 3 months to do that. Just the research and the writing aspect of it. And then it takes probably another 3 to 6 months for the Court of Appeals to even consider it, to look at it. And then maybe another 3 months after that for them to make a decision.
Wow.
So it's a very slow process.
The wheels of justice are incredibly slow.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think this is the second question, but I'm pretty sure the same student. How much would it cost to hire you as?
Now, what's really funny right here is that you've frozen, and I don't know if the screen is going to show this in the recording or not, but what I heard was, how much would it cost to hire you as? So I'm going to make an assumption that we're talking about. There we go.
There we go. Yeah. I was like, oh, Robert's acting like a statue again.
What was really funny is, I heard, how much would it cost to hire you as, and then everything froze. And so I'm talking, like comedian for Friday night show, or are we talking like, the balloon artist, party, like what, Uber driver? I mean, everything's up in the air right now. I'm on complete suspense. What are you trying to say to me, Matt? What is it?
Okay, so just like, do you have these internet connections with you, like when you're talking with a judge sometimes?
Well, you know what it might be. Usually the sessions don't go more than about 5 minutes, so that might be
okay.
The other thing is we usually throttle down everyone else's internet in the office when we're doing a Zoom call.
Oh, okay.
I didn't do that, so that might be why we're having the difficulty that we're doing.
I mean, personally, I'm just halfway expecting to be like, you're sitting there talking to a client, and it pauses out, and you come back, and the client's like smoking up, and it's just like.
Well, what's really.
Oh, seriously, you actually pause. No, you're not. You're blinking.
Oh, well, sorry.
I've been in quarantine way too long.
It's the simple things. The question was, how much would it cost to do what? To hire
to be a lawyer. And obviously you don't have to answer that one specifically, but if you want to give, what would be the general rough approximate cost to hire a lawyer? So let's say I get a DWI.
Okay.
And I being like, Callahan and King, I just got arrested. I'm calling you from the jailhouse. Apparently, I blew the thing, and I had a blood alcohol level of 2%.
Yeah. For a moment, I was wondering, was he talking about how much it costs to become a lawyer? So, law school, all that. It really depends on the case. When we screen a case, someone calls and says, "Hey, just got arrested. This is what happened." We get a lot of information from you. So, how long ago did you get arrested? How long did you spend in jail? What was your bond set at? Who's your bondsman? When's your next court date? So, are we up against a deadline here? Are we going to have to drop everything and show up to trial tomorrow? What's your criminal history like? So are they potentially going to be enhancing the punishment in your case so that it's not just a first-time DWI, but maybe this is the third time, so it's going to be a felony. What are all the different things that are at play? Based on that, then we determine our costs based on risk, based on resources that are going to be involved, all of that.
Okay. So it could be, give me a number.
I mean, I literally handled a case one time. It was a criminal case, class A misdemeanor, which was an assault case, very special, exceptional circumstances. And I told the client, look, I'm only going to charge you $500, but I've got about $5,000 worth of stuff that you're going to have to go do. You're going to need to go get in counseling. You're going to need to go to AA. You got to get a sponsor. I want you in family counseling. I want you in an outpatient program, 90-day program. So I knew that there were going to be all these other expenses that were involved. It was an exceptional circumstance and a very rare circumstance. I've also had cases where, it was up to $50,000.
Wow.
It just really depends on the circumstances.
Okay. So price may vary just depending on circumstances.
Right. Your mileage may vary.
Mileage may vary. Okay. What is your, actually, no, let's go ahead and, I think we've answered this. What is your favorite part about your job?
I love the people that I work with.
Okay.
The culture that we have in our office, just the team that I get to work with. We're all people that have the same mindset, who have the same desire to see justice in our community, to raise the bar. And we all care about one another and about our clients and about our profession. And so that's really what gets me going in the morning, is just thinking about the people that I get to work with.
Yeah. So for any of my students who remember this, Mr. Callahan here, it's his firm that sent us the three lawyers we had, the three individuals earlier this year. We had Mr. Cody Stapp for the morning classes. We had John. What's John?
Where's Gala? Oh, we froze again. There you go. John Gala.
Okay, we had John, and then we had Marcus, and I can't remember Marcus's last name.
Smith.
And Marcus he's a legal aide?
Right, he's a legal assistant.
He's a legal assistant, okay. So those are the people he's talking about, which I've had a chance to hang out with part of them in my personal life, and they're a good group of people. So, all right, so what is the weirdest, most absurd case you've had?
The weirdest, most absurd case. I mean, today? There really are so many. Okay, so this one isn't really, there are some that are just comical, and you hear the facts and you just laugh and you just try to do the best that you can. But one of the ones that it was weird and absurd, not in a humorous way, was we had a lady that was charged for assault, and she was found wandering literally naked over by I-35 and 18th Street. And she had just like all these marks on her and this grass on her and all this other stuff. And she walked over to a Valero gas station and she asked them to call the police because she had been sexually assaulted.
Oh, man.
So the police show up, and for whatever reason, they end up thinking that she assaulted this guy that was the perpetrator against her. So they arrested her for assault, and there was some weirdness too. She had some mental health issues that were going on, but there was some weirdness in that the officers saw when they found her clothes, the officers saw a lot of blood on her clothing. So much so that went to go check a trash can, if I remember correctly, to see like if maybe something had been thrown in the trash can that should be collected as evidence. For whatever reason, the officer in his police report determined that it was pig's blood that was all over her. And that's all that was ever said about it.
Did they run a test on it?
I don't know. But
That's just weird.
it's where do you start? What? So, but on top of all the weirdness, they decided to prosecute the case. So we took it to trial. We won. The jury found her not guilty in like 5 minutes. They were not happy with the officer when we pointed out the fact that he didn't even investigate the rape allegation that started this whole thing, and didn't notice that there was grass in this woman's hair. Just lots of different things. But the pig's blood just that was just a strange thing.
I mean, did you question the officer's ability to determine pig blood in the field? Like, please tell me that was a line of questioning you just decided to go ahead and be like, we're just going to challenge this wackadoo.
No, because I mean, it's at what point? I mean, how far down the rabbit hole do you want to go? I mean, like, did you grow up on a farm?
Oh, good grief.
Did you grow up eating grits? Is that why we know what pig's blood? Like what? I don't know. Like
Oh, good. It's that's kind of like my daughter the other day. There was a car had a backfire. It was like had a really loud engine going by, and she's like, "Daddy, that's a rocket." I'm like, "Baby girl, why do you think it's a rocket?" "Because it's loud." "Baby girl, that's not a rocket. That's like an '85 Cadillac with a pretty serious intake problem."
That's funny.
So, all right, we're down to our last handful. Looks like about 7 or 8 questions. All right. So, okay, so this is a 2-part question, but I think it's all tied together. Has your job changed the way you look at criminals? By this, I mean, has the common social view that all criminals are bad changed in your eyes?
Absolutely. That was one of the first things that had to happen before I went into criminal practice as a defense attorney, because I had spent 4 years as a prosecutor putting people behind bars. And so the first thing that I had to shed was that paradigm, that understanding that the state, the prosecutors, the police officers can do no wrong. And once I started meeting people that are actually affected by the decisions that are being made by officers on the side of the road, you gain a new understanding of where they're coming from. You gain compassion, you gain empathy, and pretty soon you begin to understand that their situations, who they are, is not a lot different than who you are, and that changes how quickly you're willing to punish people and how you're willing to punish people as a society. And so, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. This is kind of how long is your work day, and how much of your day is spent doing lawyer things?
Yeah. So the work day, for me, it's a little bit different because I am part owner of my business. So I get to set my own hours, but having said that, I'm typically, we're going to be working over 40 hours a week outside of a pandemic, just because it is, at the end of the day, our business. And so we're responsible for making sure that the engine is going. So when you say lawyer business, the thing that's unique about owning your own practice, and this is probably true with any business that you own, is that you're not just, for example, a widget maker. You are also responsible for taking care of all the administrative tasks related to being a widget maker, making sure that you can employ your your staff, making sure that you can keep the lights on, all that stuff. So what I tell people is that I am 100% of the time a lawyer, and I am 100% of the time a business person thinking of my bottom line, and I have to do both at the same time. It's not a 50-50 thing.